So, hi everyone. Thanks again for joining us today, and thank you, Emily, again for speaking. It's great to have you. So, Emily Rice is a Jill of all trades, offering expertise working with companies looking to enhance their company culture. Her specialty is the ability to bring out the spark in organizations that contributes to an enriched company and a happy workplace. Emily loves growing teams and helping folks find their true passion. She's a world traveler and has worked and lived in Canada, the USA, China, and Ireland. She embraces diversity and loves working with different cultures throughout the world. Emily is also an innovation specialist who utilizes design thinking principles to embrace change, not shy away from it. Thanks again for speaking today, Emily, and good luck with the presentation.
Thanks so much. I'm going to be sharing my screen, so bear with me. This is a new platform I haven't used before, so we're gonna deal with this together. So just bear with me as I do this now. All right, and hopefully you can all see my screen. At the end, I just put a quick little presentation together. I put at the very end a section just for questions. So once again, as I finish up, I'm just going to switch back over and check out the chat. While I present, I'm not going to be able, unfortunately, to hear you or see you. So at the end, once again, if you have any questions in the meantime, just drop them right into the chat feature. Alex did a pretty good intro, but I guess I would start off by just saying hello and giving you a little bit of an intro of myself and my previous experience. I'm sure many of you have seen this on LinkedIn, the whole recruiting ninja terminology. That's what I like to call myself. I'm working currently at Collective Arts Brewing, based out of Hamilton, Ontario. I am currently working from home from downtown Toronto. Another fun fact, so as Alex mentioned, I've lived all over the place, but I am actually American. So I moved here in 2018. So it's been pretty interesting to see the mix of both the US and Canada in regards to all things HR. My role at Collective is pretty interesting. So I would say it's probably pretty atypical compared to some other industries. We are currently really hiring a whole mix of folks across the realm. So retail is huge. I'm sure if you live in Toronto, you got the notes a couple days ago that we're opening up patios. So we have a new location right in downtown Toronto, right off Dundas and Bathurst, but we also have our beer garden in Hamilton. So always looking to staff up during busy season, but that's been a big one, just having to close and reopen, things like that. So hiring there, of course, hiring brewers. But then I do all recruiting for all the other roles. So supply chain, finance, lots of marketing. We're opening up kitchens at both locations. So I do have a pretty wide variety of different positions that I work on the regular. Previously, before my time at Collective, I was with a recruitment firm. So it was not in-house. I was doing recruitment, and then I was doing account management for a little bit. I worked mostly with IT positions in the financial sector, so working with the big banks in downtown. And then before that, I worked with a smaller tech startup company, and I was doing all things HR. So called the office mom. I was doing events, I was hiring. I was kind of doing a little bit of everything. So I do have a pretty wide variety of experience between, the in-house doing a recruitment firm, and then also now hiring for a pretty niche sector. New world of interviewing. So it's been weird. I'm sure everybody can kind of agree. It's been a really strange year, especially with roles like, for example, our retail hiring and stuff, where it's such an in-person experience. It's been really an interesting time to have to pivot. I love this little GIF or GIF right here because it just shows you how. I mean, I've seen it all. I've seen people taking interviews on their iPads, on their phones while they're driving. It's been pretty fun. But with that, and then my chat today is just talking about all level manager preparation. Um, I mean, I've been in recruitment for a few years now. This past year has been such a learning curve for everybody. Having to even transition solely to we use Google Hangouts for our interview platform, but just totally transitioning to digital has been pretty interesting. So that's my number one caveat is just, this past year has been crazy. It's been a really interesting time. Lots of pivoting across all industries for sure. The one thing I want to bring up, especially in regards to this era of technology and interviewing, is the two-way street, right? So I know when we think about interviewing and being in HR and recruiting, a lot of times, especially if you go into Google and you type in interview tips, it's always on the candidate side, which I always thought was a little interesting, especially chatting with other folks in recruiting. This is our life, right? Like we're very used to doing interviews at this point. But when you're working with hiring managers, that is not always the case for managers. So, my presentation today, I have a list of a couple tips that I always recommend in terms of chatting with our hiring managers and making sure that they feel well prepared for interviews. So it's less about the candidate and more about actually preparing our internal team to make sure that we're ready to be prepared. Nerves, you're not alone. So as I mentioned, interviews, even in this picture, I was looking for one on Google for a picture of a really nervous candidate, being, shaking and stuff. But sometimes I do have some managers who it's their first time interviewing for a role and they just are completely lost. So really, I always say as recruitment managers, our role is to also make sure that everybody's prepared. Of course, make sure the candidate has the details, has the information going in, but we also want to make sure that our team is also well equipped. What I find, I've seen it before, unfortunately, but there are times where we just assume that hiring managers, oh, they've interviewed before. We don't need to prep them. They got this. It's not their first rodeo. Um, when we make assumptions like this, I've seen it backfire. There are times where hiring managers they don't know what to do. They don't know the tips about, don't be on your phone on Slack, don't be multitasking. Those typical tips that come so easily to us. Sometimes managers don't think twice about those types of things. And if it's not a good experience for our candidate, then we can really lose out on some great candidates in the end. So that's just kind of my importance on why it is important to consider not just the candidate, but also our managers in interviews. Mentioned, I have a quick, this is my cheat sheet on my tips and things that when I'm training new recruiters or anything like that, I always like to make sure I stick to these 8 tips when it comes to us being in the recruiting realm and making sure our managers are prepared. Number one, anytime we have a new role, I mentioned we have a lot of roles. We've hired a ton. I think since January this year alone, Collective Arts, we've hired 56 new folks, and that's to tell you our team is just a little over 200. So we're very much growing, which is very exciting. But there are a lot of times where hiring managers are just, oh, I need a role, we got to hire quickly. My number one tip to start off, and this is before we do anything else, make sure you have a quick, even if it's a 5-minute Zoom meeting, check in with the manager. Be sure that you are aligned on the job position, what their expectations are the same understandings that you would have of the position. It's just going to make things so much smoother and easier when it comes to the start of the recruiting process. Number two, I mentioned before, it's very easy for us as recruiting folks. This is our world. This is our second nature. Try to not assume that the hiring managers know what they're doing. I always have a warm welcome session during these meetings where I make sure I'm on the same page. I always say, "Hey, did you want any tips? Or are you a little unsure about the interviews coming up?" I always ask. It never hurts. They might say no, that they have everything under control, but I always want to make people feel like they're welcome and that they can learn and make the interview experience better. So make sure you give those hiring managers opportunity to learn. Number three, prepare a cheat sheet. So I say this is your cheat sheet, but I have this awesome document. It's been a mix of several years of interviewing at Collective Arts. Basically, it's a 4-page document with just lists of questions. A lot of times, managers they would do the same thing. They'll go in Google, type in, oh, interview questions to ask. This is just a nice way for managers to have a set of questions. We have it categorized by problem solving, by soft skills, all these different sectors, so they can pull specific questions. And then I also invite the managers if they have any really fun, unique questions or challenging questions that they have found to be very useful. It's a working doc, so I always invite them to add their own questions. And then as we continue to interview, it's pretty interesting to see it grow. There's some weird ones in there, which is always fun. We like to stay interesting here at Collective Arts, but this is a great resource for our hiring managers during that interview time. They can reference this and then they can stay organized. Number four, as I mentioned, let's not assume that all hiring managers are comfortable or experienced in interviewing. Great little story that I have. As I mentioned previously, we are now opening up kitchens. This is pretty new for us. Our thing is typically beer, but we are opening up kitchens in our Toronto and Hamilton spaces. And our sous chefs, so the folks we hire to run the kitchens, their interview process is not very typical of the corporate world, I'll say the least. So we brought on somebody who was relatively junior when it comes to interviewing. Before it was just you had resumes and good to go type of setting. So I had a 15-minute session with this person, really explaining how to do a virtual interview, because that's not typical in a kitchen type of setting. But two, types of questions, right? We don't always just want to do soft skill types of questions. You want a mix of both soft and hard skill types of questions. So once again, let's just always assume that folks could use more information than less information. Number five. So this is a good one. Especially now, as kind of Mark mentioned, things are changing. I'm noticing it's starting to become a little bit more of the job seeker market. Noticing even in interviews, I'm getting a lot more. We send out offers. I'm getting a lot more candidates saying, "Oh, they have another offer," and things like that. So, I think it's really important to get that messaging across that these interview managers, hiring managers, they need to take the interviews very seriously. Um, be very focused. Don't try to multitask. It's so easy. They have Glassdoor. There's all these review sites now where candidates, if they have a bad interview experience, it's very easy for it to backtrack. And for us, it is our responsibility as recruiting managers to make sure that we're reflected in the most positive way. So, just sharing that message with the hiring managers. This is a two-way street. It's not just about the candidate getting the job, but it's also we need to have a good experience for the candidate as well. This is a huge one for me. Number six. We currently use Google Forms. Google is our home. We have a G Suite for everything, but I create a feedback form for every manager after their session to complete. I'm sure there's some other softwares that have a similar type of thing, but 5 to 10 minutes after the interview, get feedback from the manager, especially if it's a role where there's lots of interviewing happening. I always refer back to the retail positions at the beer garden, things like that. When you're interviewing 30 people at a time, it's very quick for you to forget. By having managers provide that feedback 5 to 10 minutes right after their session, it's fresh. I also do a anonymous form, so it eliminates a bit of bias. It's very common if you have a quick sit down after an interview. For example, if you're sitting down with the CEO of a company, the CEO loves this candidate and you don't love the candidate as much, you're so much less likely going to share your opinion of them not being a strong candidate, if we're just with the bias and things like that. So having kind of a third forum or a way for you to rank the candidates and remove that bias, I found it to be unbelievably beneficial. All right. So, whether online or in person, make sure all employees involved in the interview are prepared in advance. So, I always, before any interview, I'm quickly checking to make sure, of course, there's a resume there and that the hiring manager has access to the resume, that the video link, and it's clear that both all of the hiring managers and the candidates on the interview have access to the video link. And then if there's any screening notes that I have from previous phone screens or round one interviews, that I am sharing that with the hiring manager beforehand. It's always better to be over prepared. So just share that message once again with those hiring managers. Last but not least, it's a learning experience for all. I am an open book when it comes to chatting with hiring managers, especially this past year. Like, once again, it's just been such an interesting year of having to pivot the way we normally do things. So, I think, establishing that room for change and the room to be able to learn from one another, I think that's really important for hiring managers. And just, yeah, being a resource. That's what I think, enables an environment for success. So, that's basically it. That's my cheat sheet for you all on my tips and how I really communicate with my hiring managers and make it a successful interview experience for all involved. I'll flip it over and see if we have any questions. So, once again, bear with me as I go back to the screen and stop sharing. All right. Does anybody have any questions about anything I chatted about today? Any questions about recruiting in the beer world? Hmm. What are some of your favorite interview questions? Great question. I am a huge advocate on asking questions that are not your typical, what's your biggest strength? What's your biggest weakness? I have a whole training session for my hiring managers to ask very specific questions that are getting candidates to specifically talk about their experience. Give you an example. Instead of saying, let's say we're hiring a graphic designer, instead of asking, oh, do you have experience with Adobe or do you have experience with any other, Photoshop type of software, I always advise hiring managers to have candidates specifically talk about their experience with those softwares. So instead of saying, are you experienced? Candidates are always going to just say yes. Whether they're experienced or not, they're going to say yes. So I like having so much more impactful for you to say, hey, I see on your resume you do have Photoshop experience. Can you talk to me about your experience with Photoshop? Tell me about a project that you specifically worked on where you had to utilize Photoshop. Having situational based questions like that are so much better. You get such better results. So much harder for candidates just to fake it till you make it, as you can say. So I would say it's kind of specific role by role. We also, our director of operations, his name is Andrew. He loves this question, and it's kind of a running joke here at Collective Arts. His favorite question is, if you were shrunken, like you had a shrink ray and you were shrunken down to the size of like a pinky and you were stuck in a blender, how would you get out of the blender? So there's always, fun questions like that, that kind of, it just sees the creative ability for folks to problem solve and think out loud. Some people are totally thrown off by it, which is always interesting and fun to see. So yeah, I'm a big fan of situational questions and then also throwing in some fun, quirky questions like that in my list. Anybody have any other questions? I have a question for you all. I'm always curious to hear. Have you found it actually easier this past year moving digital? Have you found it easier in regards to interviewing, scheduling interviews? Um, I guess you could just respond in the chat, but just my question to everybody. I'm always curious to see people's opinions based on different industries. Yeah, me too. Awesome. Well, to be honest, I always say that that's mostly it for now, but I am super available on LinkedIn. If you can find me, I believe in my little profile, my picture, I linked my LinkedIn page. So definitely feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I would love to stay connected and to chat more. Um, let's see what Stephanie said. Yeah, that's so true. It's interesting to see some industries that have completely opened up their constraints for working at home or being able to work from home, remote versus not remote. Lots of pros and cons for sure. Can definitely be cost savings as well, especially if you're in Toronto. Finding folks who live not in Toronto can be definitely a little bit cheaper sometimes. That's so true. I'm also finding there's a lot more flexibilities in candidates now for in terms of interviewing availability. So even though they're working, a lot of folks they tend to have pretty open availability for scheduling interviews, which definitely can be a time saver on our end for sure. Definitely. I mean, even in my preference, if I was a interviewee, I would so rather be able to be in the comfort of my own house. Um, it definitely can make a huge difference. You're not, I bike everywhere in downtown Toronto. So, like, even if I had to bike somewhere for interviews, like, you never know if the sweat or the, the nature of that can make a bad first impression. So I'm even finding that people are performing better in interviews since things have gone digital. Mhm. Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for joining me today. I hope that was insightful and useful. Um, Connect with me through LinkedIn. Once again, I love to stay connected and grow my network here in Canada. So I'd love to connect with you all, but appreciate taking the time to listen to me ramble. Thanks, Alex, for setting this up. Not sure if I hit leave. I'm not sure what that does, Alex. I could you advise me on the best way to return back to this stage?
Hi, Emily. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Hi, great. Yeah, I just want to say
Hi.
thanks for your presentation. And yeah, if you do hit the leave button, it does take you out of the session as well. So I know you said people could contact you on LinkedIn. Is that the best way to reach you, or can they do through email as well, or any other social media or something?
Yeah, either or. So email is just Emily Rice at collectiveartsbrewing.com. I am, to be honest, I'm probably going to be quicker to respond through LinkedIn.
Okay.
I think we all live on LinkedIn. But I'm totally good with either.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I just want to say thanks again. I did actually have one quick question for you.
Sure.
If there's sort of a key takeaway, or maybe two or three, what's the sort of key thing you want the audience to take from your presentation today? The key thing, or
Yeah.
the top three, I guess, or something.
Yeah, I think the key thing is just to, as you like said in my intro, I'm really big on human-centered design, and I think it's so easy for us in recruiting to only think about the candidate experience and to worry about how candidates are nervous and then try to psycho analyze everything about the candidates. But a lot of times we forget the other half, we forget about preparing our hiring managers. We forget about the actual our end of the side. So I always think, it's important to take those extra couple minutes. Um, you know, is our team truly set up for success? If a candidate were to leave us a Glassdoor review right after the interview, would it be positive? Hopefully, yes. But how can we ensure that we're setting up our team so that we know for a fact it is going to be a positive review? So just asking those questions and just being mindful and thinking about the other side of the coin, I would say that that's my main takeaway, and a huge learning curve for me this past year to rethink and evaluate the interview process. That
Awesome. Awesome. That's some great info. Well, yeah, I just want to say thanks again, and thanks everyone for tuning in as well. So we do have another session starting at 3, and I know we have our other session as well that's still going live for the next 5 or so minutes. So feel free to explore the event and everything, so you can check out the networking or tune into the other sessions. But thanks again, Emily. It was a really great presentation. Lots of great information.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.